Oh, this is a pain. Wish I had a lift. So, next in a series, I've been upgrading my 2021 Wrangler here incrementally. I know if you've watched our previous videos, you saw that when we did Kenneth's lift install, he did all of these parts all in one big shot. I decided to do it one piece at a time, and so this next piece that we're doing is obviously a replacement front drive shaft. And today we are not in Kenneth's nice shop with his big lift. We decided we're going to try this more like how more people will do it, just putting the Jeep up on jack stands and climbing underneath and doing it themselves. Having a lift is really nice, but you know, once in a while we like to go back to our beginnings and try it.
Remember what life is like for the rest of the people.
And that, yeah. So, yeah, the reason why I'm upgrading my front drive shaft, and we'll get to it a little bit later in the video, is now that I've installed the longer shocks and the better control arms, I get more flexibility in the front end. And one of the things we noticed, and I think we noted it in the video, is that at full droop, the rezeppa joint is at its limit. And if you try to drive like that for too long, you will damage the joint and it will fail. So this is a preventative maintenance piece. It's something that I would have had to do anyway, but I'm choosing to do it early, just so I can have, you know, the strength. And we'll do a comparison of the joints once we take the front drive shaft out. Okay, step one, we're going to pull the front drive shaft. It's relatively straightforward. It's easier to do when you have nice impact wrenches. There are 4 bolts that hold the axle, or the drive shaft to the axle flange, and those are 15 millimeter, and an impact with an extension makes getting on that real easy. And yeah, you don't actually have to have this locked in place if you use a good impact. And obviously having a little bit more oomph with your impact helps. I'm using my middle of the road one.
We have had these out before. There's a little bit of blue Loctite on them.
Yeah. And I've seen some other videos where they put these in with red Loctite. I would highly recommend don't use red Loctite if you ever want to take it apart again, which you probably will. Do yourself a favor and use blue Loctite instead. It holds just fine, but when it comes time to get them out, blue Loctite's a lot easier. Okay. Now there is a friction fit, and so this will actually take a little bit of effort to pry loose. But we're going to turn our attention to the rezeppa joint. Alright, so this rezeppa joint, these are actually Torx head bolts, T50 to be specific, and there is a total of 8 of them. Yeah, those are in there pretty solid. Okay, so with a wobble. Okay. That's one. Now keep in mind there are these little junction things. I think they might be there to help keep them from wanting to rotate out on their own. Not sure exactly. It's a little bit difficult to maneuver when you're laying on your back. Again, it's really nice to have a lift, but it's doable here. There we go. And just 6 more. Back to the one that's being a bugger. Actually gonna try to come in without the wobble. Alright. So yeah, one of them decided to be a little bit of a pain, but otherwise they all came out. And again, it's friction fit. Oh, actually, not as much.
Not so much, yeah.
Not as much. But yeah, so we have to get a pry bar to get the other end off. Well, when all else fails, get a big hammer. What we're gonna do is we're just gonna hit this. It should start to to pop loose a little bit. And there it goes. Easy.
And just don't drop it on your head.
Yeah, the nice thing is that the cross member will catch the other end, but be prepared for it to drop. And it is not light. It's not super heavy, but it is a little awkward.
So it's pretty clear that the old shaft utilized this rezeppa joint, and then the new drive shaft is going to require a different yoke to be associated with the double cardin style CD joint.
Yeah. So, and when it ships from Tom Woods, who, by the way, does not sponsor this video, I just have had good luck with Tom Woods, so I use Tom Woods. Adams is another good quality drive shaft shop. Your metro area, you may have a good place. There's Front Range Driveline. Where are they? They're in Denver area. You know, lots of different really good drive shaft shops out there. But yeah, the big thing about these, the big difference, if you pan over there, you can see that they both use the same, very similar style universal joint on the axle end. But these two joints are completely different. Now the idea is that most of the angle is going to come from this end of the drive shaft. You're going to get the most bend, and as you get bend with a universal joint, you start to get some vibration. And so there's a couple of different ways you can do what they call constant velocity joints, which I'm not going to get into the technical details of it. There's lots of videos out there, but you know, this uses this joint, and you can see that if we compare, if you come in from above, you can see that this universal joint, double cardin, is at a much steeper angle at full flex than this rezeppa joint.
And the key thing to look at on this rezeppa, the first is if you actually look at it, and we can see it here, and hopefully it comes through on the camera, you can actually see there's some deformation of this outer ring. And that comes from, at full drop, the contact between the shaft itself and that ring. The other thing that you can see is there's this rubber gasket in here, right in here. And that as this moves to this position, that is getting stretched very tight and will ultimately result in this failing. Inside this, that joint is greased. Once that little rubber membrane fails, you get dirt, water, gunk inside that, which will ultimately result in noise and eventually catastrophic failure of the joint. There's no way to extend the movement or range of motion in that rezeppa, whereas with the double cardin we can get the additional movement, and it doesn't put the joint in the position that it's going to ultimately result in failure.
Right, and since there's no rubber boot or anything like that with these, this can go to full angle without having any, well, without having as much potential for damage.
Right.
And okay, so one of the things about this, and maybe we can show some differences. I have a couple of examples. This shaft comes with 1350 U-joints, which traditionally are the size U-joints used in 1-ton pickup trucks. The half-ton pickup trucks use the smaller 1310 U-joint, which is a fine U-joint, but my diesel engine puts out almost 500 foot-pounds of torque, and that's roughly equivalent to what my 97 F250 with the 7.3 diesel would put out. And so I'm making as much power as a 25-year-old diesel pickup truck, and so I specifically looked for a joint that uses these heavier duty U-joints. It just gives you extra strength. It'll last longer. Yeah, it's a little heavier. Yeah, it's a little more expensive. But you know what? I'll be able to just wheel on this for years and years and have trouble-free enjoyment out of it. Okay, so since I have a bunch of them laying around, decided to throw in a little bit, just a discussion and show you what the difference are between some of these universal joints. We talked about this is a standard Spicer 1310 greasable U-joint. Again, it's used in a lot of, especially older Jeeps, half-ton pickup trucks, that sort of thing. This size is the 1350 that is in the front drive shaft of this shaft that we're putting in. You can see, comparison. It's wider. The body is a lot thicker, bigger, heavier. The caps are quite a bit larger. And it's just basically bigger is stronger. Now, this one right here is a 1330, which is roughly in between these two. Pretty much only used by Ford. Since I have a Ford pickup truck and it uses 1330 U-joints, I happen to have a couple. You can see that it's, well, yeah, if you actually squeeze it together, it's about the same dimensions across, but the caps are about the same size as the 1310. The cross is a little bit thinner, not quite as strong, and it's a good, intermediate joint. And if you happen to have a Ford and you need 1330s, these are fine. You'll notice that these two are greasable. This one is not. The body of the non-greasable is stronger because it doesn't have this hole in here where the grease passage goes, but it's a lifetime fill of grease in here, and once the grease starts to go, this will fail faster, maybe in 100,000 miles rather than 150, 60,000 miles. The nice thing about these is that every time you do every oil change, or maybe every several oil changes, you can get a grease circ on there and pump a little bit more grease and make these last a little longer. And as long as you're not abusing them, they hold up fine and they're good. And just because I happen to have one, this is a 1480 U-joint. This is, again, bigger. The caps are a larger diameter. This is a much stronger U-joint. This is the joint that is used in the axle shaft of a Dana 60 Ford front axle, because once all the gear reduction of going through the differential and everything goes out to the tires, the forces on the U-joint are substantially higher out at the wheels, and so you need this big, beefy, heavy-duty U-joint to take all that without exploding. So yeah, just a simple comparison of U-joints. All right. So the next step is to remove this flange from the transfer case. We have put it in four-wheel drive. It is a 32 millimeter nut. If you don't have a 32 millimeter socket, a 1 1/8 inch socket, as long as it's a 6-point, will work. Save the nut because you're going to reuse it. Alright, now this is not going to want to pull off just by itself, so you get your handy 3-jaw puller and have the joy of trying to get it all to line up and grab hold. And you can do this with a 2-jaw puller. I just happen to have a 3-jaw sitting around handy. And shift linkage can get in the way, so just make sure that it's all lined up. And there it is. Alright, so here is the new yoke next to the old flange. You can see this one has a rubber seal in it. That helps keep fluid from seeping out through the splines past the nut. This does not have any provision for that, so what I'm going to do is use a little bit of RTV, and you just smear a glob in there. And the idea is you really only just want to get just the inside of the splines. You don't want to have a whole lot. You just need enough so that all the splines have a little bit of RTV in them, and you can see that it's actually wiped down into the splines. That's about as much as you need. And then what happens is when you put it on the shaft, that RTV will block any oil from coming out. Now I have RTV on my glove. That makes cleanup a whole lot nicer. Now, if you accidentally get some on the outside, make sure you wipe it off. And then, now I'm using technically the wrong kind of ATF because I don't happen to have the ATF plus 4 that this calls for, but all I'm doing is just putting enough on. You want to lubricate the sealing surface. That just helps it all go together without tearing the seal. And now that's greasy. I can take that glove off before I spill that. Okay. And then it's just a matter of sliding this in. And mates up with the splines, and it goes right in and doesn't require any special tool. But at this point, I need the nut.
Loctite.
Thank you. Blue Loctite. And I'm thinking this bottle has clogged itself a little bit over time, so we might have a little adventure with this. We'll see how much comes out. So yeah, a nice big bottle is fine until it sits around long enough that it decides to clog itself. and then you use way too much. Where'd my paper towel go? Absorb a little bit. Yeah, you really don't want that much. That's about it. That's about the amount you want. So, remind me to order some more Loctite. Okay? And it is a locking nut, so as soon as I reach that locking nut portion, it's a little tough to turn. There it is. My tools. And I'm going to use an impact because the torque setting on this is 160, and this tool is not capable of going all the way up to 160, I think. And I stop as soon as the nut stops spinning. Okay. Depending on where you look, the torque spec is either 160 or 166 foot-pounds. So they're both very close to each other. And yeah, getting in a position where you can crank on a torque wrench is a challenge when you're laying on your back. Oh, this is a pain. Wish I had a lift.
Technically, this is 2.5 ugga-duggas.
Yeah. There we go. I always routinely torque to maximum allowable torquage.
I routinely twist to maximum allowable torquage.
Found another bottle of Loctite that's a little easier to work with. I'm going to throw some Loctite on the 4 bolts into this flange. Okay. So, this drive shaft comes from the manufacturer with this collar. It keeps it from collapsing too far. You do want to remove that before you do this installation. There it is. Alright. So, since this end is free hanging and I have a nice shelf for this end, I'm going to take this shaft and I'm going to slide it in and set it up on the shelf. And it's a little bit hard to see. There we go. And then once the 2 of them are started, these should just go right in. And they do. Alright. Big towel. Sometimes your extensions and your socket don't play well. But yeah, so 15 millimeter, and this is a lightweight tool, so it's not going to over torque. And we have taken it out of 4-wheel drive, so it'll spin easily.
And the tires are up in the air, so this end will spin.
Right, and keep in mind on these JLs, if you still have the axle disconnect, even if the tires are on the ground, this will still spin, because there's no connection to the outside passenger side tire, unless you're in 4-wheel drive. Okay, so that gets that seated, and it's nice and in place. And it's time to get the other end lined up. So we've got the transfer case side all ready to go. We've got the drive shaft lined up, and the joint just kind of seats in there. And then again with blue Loctite. At this point, all I really need to do is just get it to start threading. It's hard to get your finger on the bolt to spin it. I'm going to try the lower one. First one's always the hardest because nothing's lined up. There we go. Okay, so that one's started. And it does help sometimes to pull it away just a little bit. And that lets the bolt line up in the hole. And then, I know it's way loose, but I want to get all four started. So they're all started. And yeah, maneuvering around a little bit underneath, laying on your back trying to get in the right position is a pain. But you can do it. Okay, so I'm finding that a 1/4 inch drive ratchet with a 1/2 inch drive or 1/2 inch socket works reasonably well to get these at least near snug. One of the issues that we're running into is you can see this nice big heavy duty skid plate, and it's on here because you can see it's gotten hit many times, but it's in the way. If I could reach up through it, I could get to this a lot easier, and I'm probably going to have to drop the skid plate to get any kind of torque anywhere near the 80 foot-pounds that it needs on these bolts. So, but right now all I'm doing is just getting these to run down and start to get snug. Yeah. Okay. So that's snug. Alright. So we got them snugged down as much as you can with a free-floating shaft and a small wrench, just enough to get it to seat. There's no real torque on it, maybe 2-3 foot-pounds at this point. So we're gonna switch to other tools to try and torque these down. Okay, so fronts are a lot easier because there's a lot more space to get to everything. You have shifted into 4-wheel drive, so you have something to leverage against. And 80 foot-pounds. Okay, and actually we need to do a crisscross pattern, so we have to take it out of 4-wheel drive.